in America, internationally, and within the Democratic Party. That's been true whether as First Lady, United States Senator, presidential candidate, Secretary of State, and now with the Bill, Hillary, and Chelsea Clinton Foundation. As First Lady, Hillary famously asserted, human rights are women's rights, and women's rights are human rights. Incredibly powerful message. Earlier this year, speaking at a United Nations panel commemorating International Women's Day, she echoed that sentiment, reminding us that equality for women remains the great unfinished business of the 21st century. And since she left the Department of State, she hasn't stopped working toward that goal. I have to tell you, on a personal note, that I know I speak for every woman in this room, that we have no finer role model as women leaders than our next speaker. For my daughters, for our next generation of women, it is an honor to introduce a woman who has played an integral role in building the Women's Leadership Forum into the force it is today. Former First Lady, former United States Senator, former Secretary of State, our friend Hillary Clinton.
So many very familiar faces, and even better to see so many new faces. I want to thank Debbie for that very generous introduction. You know, Debbie wears so many hats so well. DNC chair, congresswoman, trusted friend, mom, and her courage in beating breast cancer and going on to pass groundbreaking legislation that is helping other women beat it too is an example for us all. It is a truly inspiring and moving story, which is one of the reasons I was so pleased that just yesterday Susan G. Komen honored Debbie for her courage and achievement, because on the Hill and on the trail she fights for women, for kids, for families, She fights for all of us. So let's give our chair another round of applause. I want to thank everyone with the Women's Leadership Forum who made this conference possible, and a special personal shout out to my longtime friend, Lottie Shackelford, our new chair of the DNC Democratic Women's Caucus. I was thinking when Debbie was introducing me, it has been more than 20 years since Tipper Gore and I began gathering Democratic women together and formed this organization. Now, a lot has changed since then. We've elected dozens of women senators and congresswomen. We've seen our first woman Speaker of the House in Nancy Pelosi. And most important, we brought the concerns and hopes and dreams of women from the margins to the mainstream of American public life. You've done that. You've moved those political mountains, and I thank each and every one of you. But as much as things have changed, here's what's stayed as true as ever. The Democratic Party is at its best, just like America is at its best, when we rally behind a very simple yet powerful idea: family. Family is the building block of any society. It's the building block of our party and our country. When Democrats fought for labor rights so more families could make it into the middle class, when Democrats fought for Social Security so that our parents wouldn't live in poverty, when Democrats fought for health care and education and civil rights so all our children could grow up with opportunity and equality, we have fought for families, for moms and dads and kids and the values that hold us all together. So don't let anyone dismiss what you're doing here today as women's work. Don't let anyone send you back to the sidelines. We're here, proud Democratic women and proud Democratic men, to stand up not just for ourselves, not just for women, but for all our people, for our families, our communities, and our people. Now, I know you've already heard from our fabulous First Lady yesterday, and from our...
Exciting lineup today, and we're kicking it off with someone incredibly special to this party and to our country. Last Saturday, we marked the 20th anniversary of the Violence Against Women Act. I know this to be the most significant and most meaningful legislation that the Vice President feels that he sponsored in his entire tenure in the United States Senate. And rightfully so. Sadly, with the video that was revealed last week, we learned again how critical it is that we never give up the fight and that we continue to focus on making sure that the mechanisms of government, that the protections that the Violence Against Women Act has afforded women continue to be necessary, but we also make sure that we fight to enhance them so we can provide those protections to everyone who needs them. And the Vice President has been the leader in that fight for decades. So we've made progress, but we know we have so much more to do. Joe Biden's leadership, not only on the Violence Against Women Act, but on so many other issues, in foreign policy, in privacy rights, in health care, in being a champion for people who have no voice, for the middle class, for working families, and for people, most of all, who need their voice amplified. He is a treasure, a national treasure. And I don't think as a young college student that I wore a Joe Biden for President button on my backpack, even after we had a different nominee. Now, let me just make sure that everyone understands
here in Washington
that
DC, and the
I
fact that just
am neutral as the DNC chair and will be. But
Hillary Ronald Clinton.
I just wanted to have that historical record, which the Vice President is aware of. So, like everything he does, he's been tireless in helping us support Democrats all across this country. It is an honor to have him with us today at our 21st Annual Women's Leadership Forum. I give to you the Vice President of the United States of America, Joe Biden.
Thank you very much. Please sit down. Thank you. My God, I'm getting old. A national treasure. Gosh almighty, I tell you what.
Sit down.
No, I get up every morning, I'm so excited about what I do, I keep thinking, man, nothing's changed till I look in the mirror. Anyway, it's back with you all. You know, it is true that Debbie and I have been friends for a long time. I have, as has been pointed out, I've been around for a long time. And I've worked with a lot of great chairpersons of the Democratic Party. But you know, I have, and I mean worked with, I've campaigned for thousands of candidates over the years, literally. But I've never seen anybody work as hard and as tirelessly as Debbie has. And by the way, if we want anybody to do that, 60 seconds or 120 seconds we get to respond to some attack on the president or on the administration, the best person that's on the show is always Debbie. She's up there. And so it's great to work with her. The problem is, in being close to her, she doesn't even ask, she just tells me where to go, what to do. She's like my little sister, and those of you who know my sister, you know I do whatever she tells me. Look, folks, I can't begin without talking about, just for a second, Cynthia and Carol. I can't see the back of the room, but it looks like there's a whole lot of people here. And Cynthia and Carol, when you started this, it was a lot smaller room, and the tables were a lot smaller. And you set out to make sure that table got bigger, and you set out to make sure that at that table there were as many women as there were men. You set out to make sure that things changed. And the truth of the matter is, I see a lot of old friends out there, and some new friends, and we've been through an awful lot together, and a lot of fights. And quite frankly, if you did do the tally sheet, we won most of them. Not always won them the first time we engaged them, but we won them. And it's because of how you've changed the party, Carol, how you've changed the party, Cynthia. Because we don't just have activists in the party. We have world leaders and national leaders, women, who are so engaged in using their influence in ways that are powerful to change significant circumstances that need to be changed in the country. One of those big fights where there weren't as many at the table, but they were in the fight, was 20 years ago in the Violence Against Women Act, which got passed into law 20 years ago this month. And you know, in legislative terms, anniversaries are about settling difficulties that we've overcome, a problem that we began to solve. But they're also reminders of how much more needs to be done to finish the job we set out to do, not just in violence against women, but almost in every major legislative initiative. And the way I look at it, the second half of this fight is much less daunting than the first half. No less important, but less daunting. Remember, and a lot of you out there do remember, because you were at my side, or I was at your side, when we started this fight 24 years ago and succeeded in getting the legislation passed 20 years ago. When I suggested that we have federally funded women's shelters, the attack, not just from a little minority, but a significant portion of the intelligentsia in this country was Biden wanted to set up, what was the exact phrase they used back then? He wanted to set up indoctrination centers. No, I'm serious. That's what we were told. That's 20 years ago. Ladies and gentlemen, when we started the fight 20 years ago, I, along with many of you, was accused of engaging in an effort to break up the American family. Because violence against women was a domestic issue in the literal sense. It was a family issue. That's what we were told. Cynthia Hogan, who was my chief of staff, who, by the way, the NFL ain't seen nothing yet. They got her coming as their counselor. I'm glad they hired her. That is one bright, strong person, man. They have no idea what they just bought onto. And thank God for the league. They're smart enough to hire her. But Cynthia Hogan, when I started this effort, was being told by some of our allies, I will not mention the allies because there were allies, not at the time, that came along and said, this is just a Biden fad. It's just a fad. It wasn't a fad, it was a social failure in America that we had refused to deal with, although others had tried repeatedly for a long, long time. And you all knew it, that it was a social failure. And I was absolutely convinced from the outset, as I am now, by the way, that if we forced the American people to take a close look at the face of violence, the face of domestic violence, to look into the eyes of the women who were abused in every social strata, every income level, doctors as brutal as plumbers, football players as brutal as professors. No distinction. They had to look in the eye. As my father would say, the most terrible sin one could commit is the abuse of power. And the cardinal sin among all of those was to raise your hand to a woman or to someone physically weaker than you. I was convinced, notwithstanding what we were told from the past and others have been in the fight, that if we forced America to look it in the eye, they would stand up. Because it's always easier to pretend it's not there because it's a difficult issue. Because of some extremely brave and courageous women whom I've spoken about this week, I will not repeat in the interest of time. Because of their willingness to step forward before the cameras in the judiciary hearings, we began to put a face on this heinous crime. But I was worried that the public might think these were aberrations. These were just celebrity cases. These were cases that were anomalies, and they were horrible but anomalies. And then the women on my judiciary staff had an incredible idea. They said we should write a report that was entitled Violence Against Women, a Week in the Life of America. And they surveyed almost every law on the books in all 50 states. And they went and looked at the crime statistics for just 1 week. It took 1 week. 21,000 crimes against women in 1 week. Ordinary women, extraordinary women, young women, old women, poor women, wealthy women. Stories of a father who was abusing his daughter and was fearful she would say something, and he took her in the garage and put her head in a vice. A man who was a man of some means taking a hammer and breaking both his wife's arms, forcing them on the kitchen table.
parle d'une longue histoire stressante de l'histoire des femmes,
I
des
remember
enfants,
back then saying something I couldn't prove, but I was convinced of,
de la catégorie
being widely
femmes, comme on appelle
criticized
ici aux États-Unis.
because
Donc, tout ce
I
long
had some
discours, nous sommes désolés, nous
knowledge
n'allons
of
pas le traduire en
post-traumatic stress
français.
from
Nous
the
voulons tout
Vietnam
simplement
War,
vous
of
donner
people
l'idée
who were coming
à
home
peu
and
près de ce que dit ici le
suffering from it.
vice-président américain Joe Biden.
I couldn't understand
Pour
why
certaines raisons,
a woman who
notre service
twice a week when her
va
husband was home
vous
smashes her head
montrer
against the wall.
prochainement la fin de cette vidéo avec le discours du
Chokes
président
her.
Barack Obama
Lived
que
in
nous
that
avons promis au
circumstance for
début, mais
years.
que
Why?
malheureusement,
It would not have
ne va pas figurer sur cette
long-term,
vidéo.
lifetime
mais
impact
nous allons le
on
faire
her health.
dans la prochaine
Now the
vidéo.
CDC has come out with a study showing that.
Et MTV, nous sommes
It's
ici
the
à
reason
Washington,
for
D.C. pour vous
long-term
montrer une fois de
chronic
plus
disease.
le forum
It's
sur
a consequence of a
le
woman that
Parti
is physically
démocrate,
healed
les femmes leaders,
years and years early.
une façon de préparer comme ça les élections 2016
When
déjà.
that report came out,
Et
things
nous
began to
pouvons voir
change.
que la première qui a pris la
It
parole
broke
ici,
the
c'est bien
dam
sûr
of
Madame
congressional
Clinton,
resistance.
qui est
We
la
passed the violence
prétendue
against women
candidate aux
with one
élections
vote to
2016
spare to
aux
avoid a
États-Unis.
filibuster.
Hier, nous avions
And
écouté
each
Madame
and every
Michelle
time
Obama
we
et Madame
reauthorized
Joe
it because
Biden,
of you, and I'm not
qui
being solicitous,
nous ont
people in this
également
audience, some of whom I can
entretenus
see.
ici à ces
Each
3
and
jours
every
forum
time we've had to reauthorize.
spécial
The idea we have to fight
femmes
about
leaders du
it
Parti
blows my
démocrate.
mind.
Et elles ont été
Every
boostées
single
ce matin
time we've made
par la
improvements.
présence du vice-président
Protecting
américain
immigrant
Joe
women,
Biden et de celui
protecting
du
the
président Barack
LGBT
Obama,
community. So much
que
more.
nous allons vous
that
faire
we knew we
vivre
should have done in the beginning,
dans les
we couldn't
prochaines
get done.
images à cause de la
Now, the
longueur.
reason I raise all of this,
Merci, c'était tout pour moi. Je
is
veux vous laisser
beyond,
écouter le président Joe Biden.
talking about the anniversary.
C'était un plaisir de vous
Just
servir.
to
Une
remind
fois de
us
plus,
that we've
encore,
made
Lutte
progress.
Glenn Goulet, c'est mon nom.
64%
Restez
drop
connectés
in
et merci
domestic
de
violence
rester
between
fidèles à
93
Fremont
and
Afrique.
2010. We saved more than 12. Saved the country more than $12,600,000,000 over the last 6 years alone, reducing medical costs and social services. More than 3.4 million women and some men have used the domestic violence hotline. But if anniversaries are about setting our sights on finishing the job, let me tell you what success looks like. Because I'm often asked by the press, 5 years so passionate about this, but this is, what constitutes success? There will always be some man raising his hand to someone weaker physically, whether it's a woman or a child or another man. But success will come when the societal attitude changes and women, not a single woman in America, asks herself the question, what did I do? What did I do? Was it what I was wearing? Should I have not raised my voice? Never, never, never is it the woman's fault, other than the self-defense. Never. Never. A lot of you've got to get through your head on that issue as well. There is never. And the second thing that will mark, the second piece that's needed, is when every single man in America understands that he never has a right to raise his hand. That it just is not a right. That is always, other than self-defense, wrong. We made a lot of progress. We've begun to change attitudes in America. But we will not have succeeded till those two cultural norms, those two issues are cultural norms. That's when we'll see dramatic progress. Ladies and gentlemen, now we have to focus on what's left. There's a lot left on that violence agenda, and it's young women. I asked my staff, and I've got a brilliant staff, the president allowed me to maintain control of this issue inside the White House, and with the great cooperation of the Attorney General, I've been able to appoint all the people who deal with this issue legislatively and politically and administratively. And I have a great woman who runs the operation. And she came to me in February with a report, which I found incredibly disheartening and disturbing. And that was that although we made all this progress and violence against women, there is one area we virtually made no progress. It's where it was before. That's for young women between 15 and 25. 1 in 10 of them are still subject to abuse, physical abuse, during that period. And it's got to stop. They're victimized still. So this past April, the President gave me authority to go out and put together a group of media outlets, advertising agencies, young activists, to talk about how we can reach a different group of young Americans, young men. It made me realize that all the emphasis on what men are doing wrong, we have to reach out and engage young men, because the vast majority are decent. The vast majority are overwhelming majority, and get them engaged. And we had to communicate an important message. So later today, the President and I will be launching a new public awareness campaign that grew out of these conversations. It's called It's On Us. And I believe it's going to help reach out to college campuses across America and high schools and drive home the message that every one of us has a role of protecting young people from sexual assault. This is not a woman's issue. This is not a woman's issue. This is an American issue. This is a men's issue. And it's time for men to start to stand up. And look, folks, here's the deal. There's been another breakthrough that I've observed. And that is when you go to I sent out a questionnaire to thousands of college and high school students. And they asked, what's the one thing you could do to make the college campuses safer? They said, engage young men. So you're going to see, when we roll this out in an hour or so, an hour and a half or so, our attempt to begin a full-scale, full-blown effort that we're going to be unrelenting on over the next several years to make it clear that it is cowardly not to step up, that there's an absolute obligation that you have, a moral obligation to step up and intervene and say something. There's another thing I've observed, and I'll end with this. Take another 5 minutes of your time, about if I may. And that is, thank God we no longer talk about women's issues when we come and speak to women's groups. I used to be, and my wife Jill was so offended when now I want to talk about the women's issues. Things are going to affect the women. Where in the hell do they live? My observation is everything's a women's issue. My observation, I'm serious. Those of you in this room represent every walk of life, every economic strata. You're not just activists, you're CEOs of major corporations. Fortune 500 just came out with their list of the 50 most powerful women in America. 24 are CEOs of major corporations. 10 years ago, that number was 6. You're significant philanthropists, you're managing partners of law firms, you're professors of great and small universities. You represent every economic power center in America. You represent the collective leadership of this country. That's what Cynthia and Carol brought together that was different than anything else. And your voice cannot be denied. Your voice cannot be turned off. You've not only raised money for the Democratic Party, you've raised the bar. And you've raised your sons to know better. Like my wife Jill, I'm mildly prejudiced. Like my wife Jill, you've helped set a higher standard across the board, and it matters. You know, there's one important issue that I want to briefly mention to you, and it's the economy and the plight of the middle class. Let me start by reminding everybody in the press, you all know it, that women make up 47% of the workforce. In 1970, they made up 38% of the workforce. And you should if we had greater labor force participation economically, you should be making up another 2.5% of the workforce. More than 40% of the mothers are now the sole primary source of income for their families. That reflects the fact that there's more single mothers, 65% of whom work. The fact is that 24% of married women in America earn more than their husbands, compared to 7% in 1970 when I was getting started. So what's happened? What's happened to the middle class is maybe the most important women's issue that exists out there. You know, we used to have a basic bargain in America, and that was when you contributed to the productivity, the enterprise you were involved in, you got to share in rewards that that productivity produced. We used to have a consensus around that bargain. Democrats and Republicans, for the past 40 years, longer. But that bargain has been broken. New York Times, Sunday headline in March of this year, last week in March. The American middle class no longer the world's richest. Wall Street Journal, NBC poll, August of this year. 76% of Americans ages 18 and older weren't confident their children's generation would be better off than their own. 51% in some polls of middle-class families say it no longer is worth it to send my child to college. 51%. And folks, the middle class is not a number. I have a lot of great economists to work for. And when I talk about middle class, initially they'd say, well, that's 51,840 or 54. It's not a number. It's being able to own your own home and not rent. It's being able to send your kid to a park where you know they can be safe and they come home without getting beat up. It's being able to send your kid to a school where if they do well, they will be able to get into college, and if they get into college, you'll be able to figure out a way to afford to get them there. Middle class is about being able to take care of your geriatric parents and hope that you can do enough that your children will never have to take care of you. That's what middle class has been in America, and it is in trouble right now. That was the American dream. That's what built this country. And that's what we're determined to restore. Folks, think about this. Why have we been the most socially stable, the most politically stable, and economically stable country in the last 100 years? There's other great democracies. It's because we've had a vibrant middle class. When shock waves run through, as they had all the way back to the Depression and other times, people did not take the extreme alternative because they still believed that American dream existed. They still believed if they chipped in, if they helped build it, they would be rewarded with the proceeds. Ladies and gentlemen, recent studies not by some liberal think tank, Standard & Poor's, a recent article in The Economist, the IMF study, this income disparity slows growth. It slows economic growth. When Ronald Reagan was president, 1% of the people earned 10% of the income in America. Now they earn 20% of the income in America. From 2000 to 2012, the economy grew 29% overall. Productivity up 36%. You know how much of a raise the middle class got? 14 cents. 14 cents. Something's wrong, folks. We better damn well figure it out. We better start speaking to it. We need to do the middle class back into the bargain, because the middle class is the backbone of this economy. When it does well, the wealthy do very well and the poor have a ladder up. You can't have a conversation about economic growth, though, if women aren't fully participating in the economy. But look, these aren't applause lines, these are just a fact. The growth of women's participation in the workforce was responsible for nearly 20% of the entire growth in the GDP in America from 1970, during the 1970s and 1980s. 20% of the growth of America, the American economy. But over the past 20 years, that growth has slowed. In 1990, the United States ranked 7th among the 24 most developed countries in the world in women's labor force participation. In 2012, we ranked 16th in the world. 16th in the world. But we can change that by helping women balance work and family. The economic studies indicate that giving women the right, for example, to 3 months of paid maternity leave could increase employment participation by 1.3 to 1.8 percentage points, which would probably increase the GDP by over 2 percentage points. Other studies have found that lowering the cost of childcare increases women's labor force protection by a significant number. Meanwhile, increasing the minimum wage alone would disproportionately help women, many of whom are in low-wage roles such as personal care, healthcare support, tipped occupations. Why in God's name in the United States of America should it be that you work 40 hours a week and still end up $7,000 below the poverty level in America? Below the poverty level. But it's not just about equity, it's about economic growth for everyone. When there's more money in that waitress's pocket, she goes out and spends it on necessities. That increases employment. That boosts the GDP. It's basic economics 101. And guaranteeing equal pay for women is so long overdue and would have such a profound effect on families. So folks, Paycheck Fairness Act is not just about being fair, it's about U.S. economic growth and dynamism. And for America's sake, it's pretty simple. We have to deal the middle class back in. There's only one way we can do that, though, and I'll end with this. We have to do well in 2014. It's that basic. We really do. Because this is not your father's Republican Party. I'm not making a moral judgment. I really am not. But this is a different breed of cat. Seriously. Think about all the issues we're now fighting about. Access to the polls. 81 bills introduced in state legislatures to restrict access. It was Republicans who expanded access to the polls. It was Republicans in the Judiciary Committee that did motor voter. It's Republicans that were involved. Guys like Mac Mathias and Packwood and so many others. It wasn't Democrats alone. Republicans were the sponsors of raises in the minimum wage. I could go on and on. So I'm not joking. This is not your father's Republican Party or your mother's Republican Party. But we've made great progress. And we've made it because of you. But there's so much more to come if Nancy Pelosi once again is the Speaker of the House. If Mary Landrieu continues to be the chairman of the Energy Committee, if Kay Hagan and Jeannie Shaheen, all of whom I've been in their districts, they still let me come in, all of whom I've been in their districts campaigning for it. And they're going to win, by the way, because of you. They're going to win because of you. If we don't keep these great women in the Senate, if we don't make gains in the House, then we're going to lose the chance to make the next step in progress, which is waiting, because America is about to explode economically. We're better positioned than any country in the world to be the leading economy in the 21st century, by a long shot. So folks, to paraphrase Samuel Clemens, reports of the demise of the Democratic Party are premature. They are very premature. And there are women like you who have stepped up to run for office all over this country. I was just down in Texas for Wendy Davis. She's going to win the race. Do not give up on that race. Do not. If you have an extra dollar, give it to Wendy Davis. You're going to win that race. And by the way, I'll be heading up to Wisconsin for someone who's going to give Scott Walker the shock of his life. Mary Burke. Watch Mary Burke. I'm serious. Watch this one. What a class candidate. So folks, there are women in this room who are ready to help them win, to make leaders like Mary and Kay and Jeannie do what all that has to be done, because in spite of the millions of dollars of special interest money that's poured in, Kay's had over $10 million of negative advertising spent against her, and she's still ahead. They're all still ahead. But now we're down to the short strokes. I don't know what it is. I used to, when I was actually a candidate, I could tell you the exact number of days, whether it's 45, 46, 40, I don't know how many days, but not many. Not many. And so we're always coming to you. We're always asking for help. We do it all the time. And like you, we were raised not to ask for ourselves, but you're coming back and you come back to the same people all the time for help. And, anyway. I want to, as we used to say in the Senate, a point of personal privilege. A lot of you have helped me in my campaigns. And I know it's not always easy to write the check, but the truth is the harder thing for you to do is to put your name on the line for me or whoever you're writing that check for. That's the thing I want to personally thank you for, because you vouch for us when you do that. And you're vouching for all of these women and others to make sure that we don't slide back a decade by losing the Senate and losing ground in the House. The President is a wonderful guy. He's my great personal friend. But right now we feel like, Horatio at the bridge or a little Dutchman at the dike. I mean, all we're able to do right now is stop bad things from happening. That's useful, but it's not why we wanted the job. We wanted the job to do things, and we've done a lot through the President's executive orders in the first 2 years when we had a Democratic House. So folks, it's time for us to step up and make our case without apology. And that's why I'm so appreciative of what all of you have done. To change attitudes, to change the conversation, to stand with the Democratic women running for office all around this country, to give me and the President the opportunity to finish these issues. I can't tell you how much it means. It really matters. I had a few pictures taken in the back, and one of you said to me, "Why are you always so happy? Why are you always so optimistic?" My dad used to have an expression. He said, "It's a lucky person gets up in the morning." He meant it. Right. Gets up in the morning, puts both feet on the floor, knows what they're about to do, and thinks it still matters. This still matters, and so do you. We need you badly. Thanks for all you've done. Double down these last 40-some days. God bless you all. Thank you